Michael, you have developed this concept of vegetality, which is truly challenging because philosophers and all of us spent a lot of time discussing animality. But vegetality is a very challenging notion. So could you explain this concept that you have forged?
Yes, certainly. I think we should begin with thinking about this noun form that ends with "ety," with the suffix "ety," vegetality, animality, that points at something that the philosophers call an essence. So animality would be the essence of being an animal, vegetality, the essence of a plant. But at the same time, we live in an age when critiques of essentialism and theoretical positions priding themselves on being anti or non-essentialist are the norm. The typical formula of the somewhat quixotic battles against this philosophical strawman or straw woman is there is no X, and we can just fill in the blanks. There is no animal, there is no human, there is no world. With a positive proviso, there are only X's, there are only animals, humans, worlds. In other words, the norm nowadays is to espouse one's sincere desire to do away with essence as the product of normalization, meant to bring into line every singular deviation from the impossible ideal that essence presents. In place of a unified, static, and oppressive essence, we get the radical empiricism of scattered, mobile, if not nomadic multiplicities, strategically and temporarily assembled around a common term that has an air of nominalism about it. But is this alternative an improvement on what it rejects? And do we know what we're rebuffing when we tout our presumably revolutionary non- or anti-essentialism? So on the surface of it, essence signifies the being that is. And we see this in various languages where variations on the is include est or es or ist or jest or asmi, esti. All of this says yes, this English word too, growing from the same semantic root, to being, essence as a way of saying yes to being. This is how I want to interpret it. Non-essentialists then are for or on the side of non-being. They say no to being, to which they, as it were, despite themselves, say a yes to this non-being, right, despite their no to essence. In effect, these non-essentialists are left with nothing on their hands, albeit a nothing that is not pure negativity, and that infinitely mutating is but a negative imprint of essential being. And this is where vegetality enters the fray. Although on par with humanity and animality, it proposes to name the essence of plants, although it proposes to do this, every path toward the green understanding it opens winds up in the gray area of non-essential essentiality. Let me very quickly direct the beams of theoretical spotlight onto three such paths, namely the spatial, the temporal, and the behavioral interpretations of vegetality. Even if in one way or another I have discussed all three in my previous philosophical works on plants, they will get a new lease on life in the gray glow of what I just termed essential non-essentiality. If we think about the time of plants, then we really think about what I call a heterotemporality. The time determined by the other of plants, be it the inorganic other or human technologies that intervene in the natural cycles, from the very simple contraption of the hothouse that determines the ripening time of a given plant to certain ripening gases with which, again, the ripening process is rendered quicker. So if the time of plants is this kind of heterotemporality, is the time of the other, then vegetality, the essence of plants, depends on the being of the other. The plant is determined, is stretching toward this otherness, and this relation to the other determines what the plant or who the plant is. This is on the subject of the time of plants. The space of plants is also an interesting kind of a situation to consider, because obviously the speciality of plants is their coevolution with the places where they grow. So that plants do not exhibit these clear-cut distinctions or differences between the inside and the outside, but are molded by the places where they grow, For instance, a tree sending more branches on the sunny side on which it grows. And at the same time, communities of plants shape the places of their growth by creating microclimates, by modifying the makeup of the soil through their decay and so on. So again, there is a kind of very dynamic relation and determination by the other in the spatial aspect of plant being. And then finally, plant behavior or plant action is obviously very different from what we consider to be behavior in the case of animals and humans, because in the case of animals and humans, we know that a certain being behaves through the movement of limbs, through a certain kind of displacement, for instance, or dislocation, running away from danger, or moving in search of food. Plants obviously also move on a much slower time scale. Their growth is their movement, and they can grow or move toward or away from certain things. But what plant scientists call plant behavior is really an initiation of changes in the very makeup, in the very constitution of plants in response to given situations, such as a drought, for instance. So plants behave not only by growing away or toward certain things, but also by modifying themselves, by changing themselves, by losing leaves or growing new organs in response to given situations. And so if we combine these three features into the essence of plants or vegetality, we see that they amount to what I have just called the non-essential essentiality, one that is not static, but that is defined by constant movement, change, metamorphosis, and that is constitutively oriented toward the other and receives its cues from the other regarding the very central axes of plant being.
You know, this project is called a traveling plant, and it's a metaphor for a lot of ideas inside. But the movement of a plant is not only its growth or its changing of shape and quote unquote organs, it's also plants have developed tricks, I would say, or systems or methodologies to use carriers to move away from themselves. I tend to use the word carriers now because we humans use cars, bicycle, cars. We had horse carriage, we have planes, we have trains. We are moving with our feet, but we have also developed external carriers, and plants are using a lot of external carriers to move away from their original body, quote unquote. Mm-hmm. We'd like to hear you about this.
Yes, I think that this is a very rich area for reflection. On the one hand, I associate this kind of plant movement with the diasporic movement, because diaspora, as it is applied to human populations and a kind of spreading away from the place where a certain human population lived, the diaspora is really a vegetal term, because it literally means, when translated from the Greek, a division of the seed or the splitting of the seed. So plants are diasporic in that sense, that they can send their genetic material far and wide, using not only the carriers such as insects, butterflies, bees, and so on, but also working together with the elements, collaborating with the elements such as the wind, right? Wind flows and the movements of air that pollen and seeds and spores can catch a ride on and be spread in very far from the place of their origination. I think there, especially at the level of populations, we can really align vegetal and human populations and see the kind of movement happening in parallel. But it is not just a parallel, because as you mentioned, plants use external carriers, and we tend to think about insects, but perhaps we humans are also the external carriers of plants, because through human movement, various plants have spread very far from the source where they first sprouted. It's enough to think about the humble potato that from the Americas spread all over the world in a very short period of time, thanks to this increased human mobility. So perhaps one of the changes that we need to initiate in our thinking about our relation to plants is not to see them as the means to satisfy our needs and desires for food, for beauty and whatever, but to also adopt the reverse perspective and see how it is that humans are instrumental in satisfying the certain needs of plants, such as spreading away from and moving away from the source or the place where they first grew.
Would you include in the way we modify plants? Because we tend to see our way of modifying plants, be it with quote unquote traditional agronomy. We have all the tomatoes and vegetables and fruits that we eat now are not, again, quote unquote wild. We have cultured them, and we're going further now with GMOs. And we tend to look at this from our human perspective as not necessarily being very good for the plants. But do you think it could be also from the point of view of a plant? Do you think they take some kind of advantage from that?
I think from the point of view of plants, if we could imagine such a point of view, we could start thinking about the ethical aspects of such a modification, not based on an anthropocentric ethics, but based on the ethics of the plants themselves. I have started this kind of work a few years ago, and one of the conclusions that I have reached is that even though plants are in their very essence, in their very vegetality, are malleable and open to these influences from the outside and are constituted and constitute themselves through these external influences, there is a kind of limit to such malleability, and this limit is what I take Aristotle's vegetative soul to be, because for Aristotle this vegetative soul is comprised of two capacities: to obtain nourishment and to reproduce itself. And so to threptikon, the vegetative soul, is proper to plants, but it is also shared by all living beings, whether plants, animals, or humans, that have other added capacities according to Aristotle, but presuppose this basic stratum at least. So the ethical implication is this: if plants are modified in such a way as to lose their reproductive capacity, for instance, through the production of sterile seeds by corporations, then it already touches on something that is essential and that should not be taken away from this complex of the vegetative soul. That is, it is not just this or that external feature that we're interfering with, but something that really defines the plant and its capacities at the very core. And this would be one implication of this ethic of plants that I propose.